Today's video is all about an elaborate party wrapped in a mystery inside an escape house, and how we create the components to bring the game to life for a single night of play each October.
It is an old maxim of mine that when you have excluded the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle.
The world of reality has its limits. The world of imagination is boundless. Jean-Jacques Rousseau.
Each October, as the weather attempts to make the change from sweltering heat to acceptable for human habitation once again, those of us in the little house focus ourselves on bringing an imaginary world to life for a solitary evening. A bespoke mystery escape house party commissioned by my second oldest girl child, the lyrical Pixie, who plays hostess to a carefully curated guest list of friends and acquaintances for one night event, is an all-out family affair. My oldest daughter, who also just happens to be my co-conspirator in all things fanciful and imaginary, works with me to write the mystery and produce it with the help from our creative team. The creative team referenced is made up almost entirely of pixies, with the addition of their father, who shows up randomly to add next-level help wherever it's needed. Without this indispensable little group, my visions would never make it to completion, nor would it be anywhere near as enjoyable. These pixelated people make everything fun, and sometimes hilarious, depending entirely on the number of hours of sleep we've had during the push to finish a project. Even writing a mystery game for 24 players with 24 character bios and several rounds of play can be delightful with this group. Mind you, I did have to make almost all the team members from scratch and put a lot of years into their training. I'm nothing if not dedicated to the creative process. This aside, the current plot for our mystery escape house was set in October of 1940, during the Battle of Britain, in an old manor house in the English countryside. Previous year's parties had included a 1930s speakeasy, an abandoned old mansion, a graveyard, an old train car, a mad scientist lab, a dressing room, and one game with a steampunk vibe. But this year's World War II era theme was the next step in our live game development, with QR codes throughout the game offering clues and hints, a soundtrack, narratives for each new chapter of play, and a video wrap-up. And so we began with a cup of tea, or 12, tucked into the Churchill room, a small private light-filled space dressed with a comfortable leather couch, chairs, and a low table, and decorated with walls covered in Churchill memorabilia, all housed in our favorite English tea room. Here the tea flows freely for a price, and we whiled away the afternoon weaving the bare bones of the story and components needed for our mystery. Multiple meetings were held to flesh out the characters and develop their stories, as well as to create the invitation, which would allow the guests to get familiar with their characters far enough ahead that they could put their costumes together and practice their very best British accents. The next step was to measure the rooms we would be turning into the game spaces and create a blueprint for building reference, so the warrior pixie and I could go to work designing and building elaborate sets and props. Pixies are Imagineers down to the bottom of their precious souls, So when I suggested we take a rectangular, boringly white room and turn it into a brick cellar in an old manor house in the English countryside during World War II, they didn't bat an eye. And when I expressed the desire to drop a Luftwaffe bomb in the backyard that would require disarming, their confidence in my good sense was shaken slightly, until I assured them I meant a prop and not an actual ordnance. This was a horse of a different color, and they quickly decided this would be an exciting challenge. After a small brainstorming session where it was determined that we would not demolish the room in question and rebuild it with actual bricks and salvaged wood, a solution the Golden Pixie thought clearly would bring the most realism to our game, and while her dedication to realism in her craft would certainly have impressed Gustave Courbet, I pondered that there might be an easier, less destructive way to bring an equally acceptable level of authenticity to the space. It was decided that we would create aged brick walls and timber beams out of a stack of 11 half-inch purple insulation foam sheets measuring 4 by 8 feet, which were purchased from the Home Depot. This seemed suspiciously lacking in probability as far as the fair-haired pixie was concerned, but she was willing to give me my lead and see where I ended up, before breaking out her toolbox and dismantling her sister's rented home. And in case you were wondering, yes, she has her own tools. Once we arrived home with the insulation sheets, they were measured out and marked by the pixie's father, and a brick procured from the backyard was used as a template to create the wall pattern we were after. With the sheet marked with its brick grid, it was handed over to the warrior pixie, who created indented grout lines using a jeweler's soldering iron with a flat tip and the help of a straight edge. Once the sheet was properly 3D'd, it was given to the dark-haired pixie and me, so we could use a heat gun to create a textured brick effect across the tin walls of insulation panels. The entire process was tedious, to put it mildly, and less than halfway through the task, the Golden Pixie's idea began to look like it would have been the easier of the solutions. The next step was to coat each panel with Drylock to give the foam bricks more texture and prepare them for their next layer of paint, which was a brick orange exterior primer and paint combo, fortuitously found on the Oops paint shelf and consequently costing only $9. A bargain, as you will know if you've ever priced exterior paint. The Golden Pixie pointed out that God had provided the perfect paint and the exact amount needed to cover tin walls of faux brick, and how even the little things are important to God. So, for the reduced price of $9, I got paint and edification. It was a very good deal indeed. Once the sheets of brick were dry, they were brought inside to our dining room table, and using sea sponges, burnt umber, nutmeg brown, and true red acrylic paint, watered down slightly, we blended layers of color until we were happy with the old brick appearance. And then, once again, we let them dry, before using a pewter gray acrylic to fill in the grooved grout lines. Each wall was then given a wash of burnt umber mixed with glazing fluid and water, and wiped off to effect a sort of grimed by age look. And just like that, we had a house full of brick walls. Next, we needed very old timber beams for the walls and trim, So a single panel of insulation, 1 inch thick, was cut into strips and brushed with a variety of different sized wire brushes until it took on the texture of old worn boards. They were then painted and left to dry. A big thanks is due to Van Oaks Props, whose YouTube channel inspired all of us with his method of creating old wood from foam. And of course, we couldn't just watch one of his videos, so while we painted roughly a gazillion bricks, we binged his fantastic channel. In the end, it was a grueling, time-consuming process, and the Pixies were heroes as they spent hours painting bricks and filling in grout lines alongside the rest of us, and then took over completely as the Warrior Pixie and I moved on to building a floor-to-ceiling fireplace and hearth and a World War II Luftwaffe bomb facsimile. The Pixie's father had the best solution for the unexploded World War II ordnance prop, which included using a 12-inch circular cement pillar form for the body of the bomb. Meanwhile, I was determined to create recessed panels that had to be unscrewed and which contained 2 lit resin tubes each, with a number of colored wires, one of which, when cut, would deactivate the ordnance by turning out the light. Piece of cake, in theory. Multiple trips to the hardware store, Michael's, Hobby Lobby, and the Restore, a package of single diodes from Amazon, a few failed starts, more brainstorming the technicalities, lengths of clear plumbing hose, a bottle of clear casting resin, transparent resin dye, joint compound, cardboard, scrap lumber, and copious amounts of duct tape later, we had an unexploded Nazi ordnance. Thanks to my husband's determination and attention to detail, the inset wires and backlit resin bars turned out brilliantly. And when the specific wire was cut by the game players, the glowing bars would go dark, indicating that the bomb was defused. And there was still more work to be done. An old claw and ball executive desk that had been painted in purples and pinks for a previous set needed an updated paint job, and had for some time. But sometimes things get placed on the back burner until you really have no choice but to address it. This desk was just such a project. The new finish was darker and more mysterious, and fit perfectly with the theme of the Manor House study, and since it is also my actual desk, it makes me happy as well, at least for the moment. With the desk finally attended to, the Warrior Pixie and I picked through our scrap wood pile for pieces of wood to use in the construction of a stone hearth and fireplace project that would become the main focal point of the imagined study. Our materials for the project consisted of 2 sheets of 1/2-inch plywood, a deconstructed antique fireplace surround, which I had been saving for roughly 15 years, 100-year-old intricate New Orleans trim, and a 12-inch set of drawer runners. And with everything gathered, we got to work building out the hearth. The front of the hearth was created to be a hidden drawer with a spring closure, which when pushed on would open to reveal itself to the guests and contain a clue in the game. Once the hearth and drawer were built, I created a large stone effect with joint compound, and after it was thoroughly dry, It was painted to look like gray stone with thin grout lines in between them. And for our next trick, we had to build the fireplace in its entirety, as if it were a puzzle, so it could be transported, constructed for the party, and then afterwards taken down easily. Together, the warrior pixie and I worked out the different elements and how they would slide or fit into each other. And because we were working on little sleep and on an impending deadline, there was a great deal of measuring before leaping occurred. And even then, I had to more than once undo what I had already done and adjust it. Every brain cell and muscle had been exhausted, and we stepped back and admired our handiwork before passing out for the night. In the light of morning, things looked brighter, and we set about creating character with our paint finish for the fireplace and making sure that everything worked properly. And thank goodness it did. One of us might have had a nervous breakdown on the spot if it had not. Light of morning or no. Meanwhile, the Pixie's oldest sister, whose sharp mind for codes and puzzles would, in previous time, undoubtedly have seen her recruited into Bletchley Park for the war effort, develops the puzzles that lead the participants of our games to the clues they will need to solve the mystery. For each locked room, there are several games or clues that must be physically solved in order to receive a key to open the next area of play. So for weeks leading up to the party, she is deep in codes, puzzles, and smaller props such as newspaper articles and documents or keys hidden in the most unlikely of places. We have found, after years of doing this, that capitalizing on each of our strengths makes the process smoother. Creating an entirely fictional world that is woven together with strands of historical facts in a game that will challenge the player is both fun and exhausting. Still, the common thought among those of us in the little house is why must one adhere to the boring, stuffy routines of reality when one can occupy the world of untethered imagination and creative collaboration just as easily?
Oh dear, this is an unfortunate turn of events.
We are firmly of a mind that accomplishing the things that must be seen to does not require tiresome conformity, if one has the capacity to reject the narrative and live outside the restrictive box of others' expectations. For some, being outside the box is their natural state of being. For others, it is an uncomfortable stretch to flex their childhood muscles of playing pretend and ignore the naysayers who demand strict adherence to seriousness in everything. It is my suspicion that almost everyone has a bit of their child self inside, just longing to throw off the confining garments of adulthood, even for just a brief time, and enter into a world created from figments of the imagination, letting the realities of the world become invisible for a few hours. If this were not so, then a certain mouse and his colorfully eccentric friends would never have been able to find an audience for their imagined world, or have welcomed tens of millions into their enchanted kingdom over multiple generations. Imagination is never out of style, and there should always be time for flights of fancy, if for no other reason but to awaken one's childlike innocence and perspective of the world, and lend it color again, even for a moment. Which is why we love the process of creating a place that encourages creativity to run wild. In part 2 of this series of videos, we will bring you along to set up the escape house, look at some of the QR clues, and to see the before and after of the escape house set. You may even see a few of the players in character. We hope you enjoyed the video and that you will like it and comment and share if you did. Please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel, WWII-inspired, and clicking the bell icon to be updated when we release new videos. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.
I am enough of an artist to draw freely upon my imagination. Imagination is more important than knowledge. Knowledge is limited. Imagination encircles the world. Albert Einstein.